Hello, welcome everybody to the community conversation for Juneteenth on the intersectionality of freedom in Boston. So happy to have you all here. Today we're going to start our event off by taking a look at what Black liberation means to some Black people in Boston.
The word liberation derives for me to talk about freedom. For me as a Black trans woman, it gives me hope. Girls like me are shunned away, we're frowned at, we are made fun of, and we're ostracized. For our community of LGBTQ, as trans women of color, we started Pride, dealing with liberation, dealing with being free, dealing with police brutality, dealing with being murdered, dealing with being bullied, and transphobia. To be free just means to have my space, to have my safe space, just to be me. And to be free, to be liberated means that I am equal, I am human, I deserve everything in this world that everyone else deserves.
¿Qué es lo que significa la liberación de la raza afroamericana? Para mí, la liberación quiere decir que uno puede tener la oportunidad de caminar sin tener miedo que uno va a ser asesinado. La liberación quiere dejarnos saber que nosotros de verdadmente tenemos la oportunidad de seguir adelante como una raza. La liberación para los afroamericanos, para mí, dice que es en la alegría, en todo lo que quiere ver con la resistencia, de que como nosotros podemos seguir adelante. Y bueno, para mí, como una mujer afro-latina, yo entiendo que la liberación es una cosa que es constante, que no es el destino, pero es una parte de nuestra cultura.
Black liberation to me means churches and barbershops and the ability to be yourself and express yourself in really authentic ways. I think that for me, liberation is the ability to authentically be who you are. It is the ability to recognize the greatness that is in our culture as Black people. I think it is the ability to express our joy. We say Black joy, Black abundance, Black excellence, Black girl magic, Black boy joy, right? I think about all of those different things, and I think about Blackness as not a monolith, as being so diverse and being able to really showcase and highlight that in authentic ways as Black liberation.
Pour moi, libération pour mon noir, sont questions d'opportunité. Opportunité pour bâtir richesse pour plusieurs générations. Opportunité pour montrer la joie, la peine, tristesse et mécontentement sans peur et représailles. Opportunité pour vivre heureux, joindre guérison et puis pour nous gagner pouvoir dans toute institution. Accès à bonne santé, beau logement, durable et opportunité pour bien-être.
Welcome again. Thank you so much for being here today as we talk about the intersectionality of freedom, specifically the nuances of that fight in the Black community in Boston. I'd like to welcome Queen Cheyenne Wade of Cambridge Heart Program, Ivana Solano of Love Your Magic, and Shagun Adowu of Beckman, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited to be in conversation with each of you. I would like to start by talking about what Black, as you just saw in the videos, we had different people in Boston talk about what Black liberation means to them. And I'd love to start this conversation by finding out what Black liberation means to you as we celebrate Juneteenth. Queen Cheyenne Wade.
Thank you so much for having me here. Great to see you, Janae. I think for me, Black liberation is not only just the dismantling of systems that I think actively harm and really oppress and exploit Black folks, and not just Black folks, but the intersectioning kind of identities of Black folks, whether it's Black queer folks, Black disabled folks, Black neurodivergent folks. It's really the dismantling of all those systems that continue to oppress and exploit us, whether it's class oppression, racial oppression, gendered and sexuality oppression, as well as I think what's something that's really important that I see as Black liberation is also the creation of the worlds that we want to see, of a world where Black folks are free, where Black folks are not living in fear, where we're actually engaging in real resilience and something beyond survival, right? That's, I think, really what Black liberation means to me in a way that we are able to thrive, with most importantly, having our needs met and our determination of our communities really valued. So that's where I'll stop there, because that's a big question.
That's a beautiful answer, Ivana.
Thank you so much for having me today. To me, Black liberation means acknowledging the value of all Black people's lives, whether cisgender, transgender, or genderqueer. We know that all Black people deserve their humanity, all Black people deserve protection, and all Black people deserve freedom. And given the work that I do specifically, I know that there can be no freedom and no liberation for Black people unless women and girls are included in that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the one and only Shagun.
Well, first, thank you, Janae, and to the Boston Globe for hosting this conversation and having me back. We had a little fun last year for another conversation, so happy to be talking about the Black community specifically and this topic, especially around such an important time in our history, Juneteenth. I was going to make a joke and say, please see above, but that would have been an insider and no one else would know what we're talking about. But, you know, Jessica Pierre actually is our director of communications. And I think we work so well together because when I think of Black liberation, I was watching her video, which I didn't have the chance to do earlier. And, you know, I want to be able to copy and paste what she said. It is the access. And also when I think of Black liberation, it's also the freedom to not always have to talk about the things that are impacting our community. I think when I think of Black liberation, it's knowing that whatever the troubles are, they can be solved. And a lot of times when we talk about the issues impacting our communities, part of those conversations are always about how we attempted to solve the problem and got set back. So for me, we'll be truly liberated when we know that we won't be set back every time we try to move forward.
Thank you. And I know I introduced each of you and there were descriptors of your jobs and mission work behind your names, but I would really love to hold space for what each of you do, because part of why I wanted to be in conversation with you is because all of you do work that is vital to Black freedom and freedom period, because we all know when Black people have equity, it results in everyone having equity. Queen Cheyenne, I know you just recently launched the Cambridge Heart Program. Can you tell us a little bit about that program and what you're doing in Cambridge?
Yes, thank you so much. So the Cambridge HEART program stands for the Cambridge Holistic Emergency Alternative Response Team. So Cambridge HEART is our little acronym. And it was created by an open process facilitated by the Black Response, which is an organization, grassroots organization of Black and Brown young folks in Cambridge who are committed to implementing transformative practices into our city and into our communities. We've facilitated a process with over 50 community organizations, community members, and service providers in Cambridge and around the country to co-develop a response that identifies needs and practices that can be used outside of policing systems in Cambridge. And really, this program will work to address root causes of harm in impacted communities, such as houselessness, unemployment, food and financial insecurity, domestic and neighborhood conflict, drug abuse, and emergency medical support, as well as being a proactive approach to community cohesion and not just wanting to address issues when the harm is occurring, but really thinking about how are we creating a community where we're actually making harm, violence, and abuse unthinkable. And really that means having people's needs met, making sure that, again, folks don't need to steal because they have enough food and they have enough clothes on their back and they have the resources to be able to succeed. That's really what the HEART program is really hoping to bring to our communities. And something that I think is so beautiful about it is that it is a community-based process. It was a bunch of Black and Brown folks, houseless folks, folks who worked in domestic violence agencies in the city, and folks from around the country. We worked with folks in Eugene, Oregon with Cahoots, with folks in Oakland and Sacramento and Philly. We worked with folks around the country to really bring in best practices from existing programs and really make sure that we're grounding that this program needs to be created by folks in Cambridge who are most impacted by these issues, which is a majority of the Black community in Cambridge. And so, you know, we are still in the process of getting this program up and running, but we are having pilot aspects of the program running through the summer and through the fall. And we hope to have the program fully functional and up and running to hire community members to be the first responders and administrative staff by 2022. So that is a little bit about the Cambridge HEART program.
And this is, to me, what Queen Cheyenne just described is literally what we're talking about when we talk about radically imagining how we can be better and how we don't have to use systems that we thought we needed that actually harm us. Ivana, the work you do with Love Your Magic is, I just really feel like if people could see it and be there, they would be just so moved to their spirit. So can you talk a little bit more about what Love Your Magic is and the work you do serving Black and Brown girls and fighting the criminalization of us?
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. So Love Your Magic is a grassroots organization that supports the healthy development of Black and Brown girls. Our programming and initiatives are designed to empower and support Black and Brown girls through an emphasis on self-love, self-advocacy, and sisterhood. When we launched, we really launched in hopes of really responding to the disproportionate amount of Black and Brown girls that were being pushed out and criminalized as well as adultified in schools. Really, the work that we do equips Black and Brown girls with the tools to advocate for themselves. And we provide a space for girls to tell their stories, develop their self-esteem, and celebrate each other, which we know that our girls are socialized to really be silent. They are taught that their voice does not matter. And in many ways, society pits Black women and girls against each other. And so we're really working to disrupt that narrative and create safe spaces where Black girls feel loved, they feel seen, and they know that they are valued and nurtured.
Thank you. Shagan.
Hello again. Well, I have the great and good privilege of being able to serve as the president of Beckman, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. It's an organization that was founded almost 6 years ago now, following the publication of the Federal Reserve's Color Wealth in Boston, where we talked about the racial wealth gap. And so today, the organization, we're statewide, and we work to advance the economic well-being of Black businesses and people and organizations through business and leadership development, through advocacy, and by connecting our folks to different resources. And today we represent the over 2,000 Black firms that employ 17,000 Massachusetts residents and generate an annual revenue of $1.9 billion, all of which comes back into the state economy. And picking up on a point that you made, actually, Janae, about, when we create equity for Black communities, it's really creating that for all communities. The same is true when we think about our businesses. Every study out there shows the important role that Black businesses play in not just sustaining the local Black economy, but really the overall economy for wherever they're based. And Massachusetts, for sure, is reliant on Black businesses. And when we aren't doing well, neither is the mass economy. So we're working to make sure that we're saving our businesses and helping folks grow new businesses, because that's also a piece of liberation, that wealth is important for our communities.
Shagun, before I move on from you, you said something last year to me in an interview that I thought was so powerful that I think people have heard you speak a lot about the importance of equity and economic empowerment, but I don't know that they've heard you talk about this particular thing. And you talked about how in the community, we need everybody, there's different ways to fight for freedom. So we need the people who are fighting for economic empowerment, and we also need the people who are anti-capitalistic. And can you talk about how these things work together and how we need everybody on board? We need all methods of revolution.
Yeah, I think one reason why a lot of us always feel exhausted is because we are trying to do everything for everybody and keep forgetting that each of us plays a particular role in helping to not only dismantle, as Queen Cheyenne was talking about earlier, dismantling those systems of oppression, but also building the new world that we have that vision for. And so for Beckman, which is a capitalist organization, we are working within the confines of the economic system that we have today to provide support to our businesses. But that doesn't mean that that is our vision for the new world. We, in my opinion, we are working with other organizations that have that vision and are working every day to bring that vision about. And I see the role of Beckman and like-minded partners in, as we're dismantling those walls of systemic racism, we're taking those bricks and handing them off to the folks who are building that new world to build that stronger and resolute system. And so, yes, I think, each of us does not have to be all the way there for every single thing, but we all have to note that on the way to freedom, each of us has a particular role to play, whether we're the diggers digging us out or the builders who are building the roads, but all of us have that role to play. And when you find it, do it lovingly and passionately.
Thank you so much. A lot of the questions that we got sent ahead of the panel were about what intersectionality means and what intersectionality and freedom means. And I know a lot of times when we talk about this, we talk about allies and how allies can be better. But when I was thinking about this conversation and being here with you all today, I was thinking about that intersectionality within our own community and that nuance within our own community and what it means to be allies to one another. Because when Kimberly Crenshaw coined that, everyone acts like this is such a new term, and it's like it's been around since 1989. A Black woman coined it, and it's specifically talking about the intersections of our identities, not just race, class, and gender, but also other facets of our identity. And in the Black community, we quickly noticed last summer that we couldn't we said Black Lives Matter, but we also had to say all Black Lives Matter because, Black trans women are literally being murdered at unthinkable rates. They are living in their very own epidemic, and our people are not out in the streets the way they should be, the way they were for the many men who've been killed by police. Same thing with disabled Black people, and it just goes on and on and on. I think Ivana or Queen Cheyenne spoke to the various nuances within our community and just within our abilities. So I want each of you to tell me what intersectionality means to you and what it looks like in our community.
Yeah, this is these are great questions. But I really want to ground and thank you, Janae, because I think the term of intersectionality gets so removed from where it was originally created and the context in which it was created. It was, again, this term created by Kimberly Crenshaw and largely the Combahee River Collective, understanding that it was actually a process, that it was not like a thing that you were saying, I am intersectional or I can hold this, but it was actually a process in which for us to understand how different identities share exploitation, share oppression and exploitation from these higher classes and powers that are exploiting and oppressing us. So, intersectionality is really thinking about how does the oppression of Black trans folks actually is very connected to the oppression of Black neurodivergent folks. That's very connected to the oppression of Black low-income folks. And also that these intersecting identities, like one person can hold all of those, and that it'll look very different of their understanding and the way that they move versus another person who also might be Black, trans, and neurodivergent, right? And so intersectionality gives us really a really solid grounding framework and process to be able to build solidarity in our communities. And that's what I see as intersectionality, is actually a tool for us to build community and build stronger ties, understanding that there are really actually more similarities between our communities than there are differences, and that the differences are usually exacerbated by the state and by white supremacy and by these things to continue to really kind of keep different identities and classes and communities separate so they can't build together. And so I think, that's really how I see it and understand it, is as a process and a framework of building solidarity in intra-community and, externally in community. And I think for me, I really was able to see that. I think I'm always having to kind of give it up to my family and to my community. In Cambridge, I grew up in Cambridge in public housing in North and West Cambridge. And, my mother was, diagnosed with a chronic illness when she was very young. And my father was working all the time. And so my family, was always kind of on it, going, trying to address issues, and the ways in which my community supported my family, but also the way that my family also supported the larger community. When there were, issues between the housing authority and, specific tenants and specific folks in public housing, my parents were the ones who were mediating those conversations. When someone was hungry and someone didn't have food, or someone, didn't have dinner, in our community, other people would be making, potlucks and giant kind of open dinners that everybody would come to. If someone was having a barbecue, in our community, everybody was invited. And these were small things that I think started opening me up to the idea that we really all are connected, and that my well-being is connected to the well-being of everyone on this planet. And that really is, something that I think intersectionality allows us to build, is that I can't be free until Ivana is free, until Segun is free, until Janae is free, that all of us, our freedom is interconnected, and that, continuing these same systems that try to split our freedoms as disconnected, as individual, is actually, going to keep pushing us further away from freedom, from liberation, from the worlds we want to see. So I think that's kind of how I understand intersectionality and how I really saw it, I think, growing up, and really kind of was instilled in me.
Thank you so much. Ivana, I've seen firsthand, I love your magic, the way that you teach Black and brown girls that that their fight is together, that the intersection's there. And also them, like it's Black girls and them. And can you talk about what pushed you to do that and what you've seen as a result of it? Because you're working with our youth every day.
Thank you. I think as someone who is living at the intersection of being Black, woman, and queer, this work is really personal to me. I think as an organization, we really have an understanding that our differences do not separate us, but rather unite us in the fight for liberation for all Black people. And I think the work starts when our young people are just that young. I think we have this misconception that young people can't have these conversations. As a former kindergarten teacher, I know that that's not true. And it's important that we really start to disrupt the messages that society really tries to push on our young people. And so as an organization, we really aim to host events and programming and have conversations not only with the young people, but also with the adults and the caretakers that are pouring into our young people and nurturing them. Because we know that it's our collective responsibility to really shape the world that we want to see. I think for us, it's also important to really continue to hold on to the notion that liberation happens in community. And so all of the work that we do is about bringing the community together and sharing knowledge with each other, and really just rejecting the notions that, specifically when we talk about the Black queer community, that Black queer people are not living according to their ancestors, which I think a lot of times is something that comes up in conversation, especially within the Black community. And so I think for us, it's so important to start to engage young people in these conversations and teach them that, you know, we love ourselves as individuals, but it's also important that we love ourselves collectively. And what does that look like? And I think the impact of that is just being able to see young people using their voice to create change, not only in their communities, but in their personal lives. And also just creating a community where young people are celebrating each other and living with so much agency and living as their authentic selves, which I think for me, I know growing up, respectability politics was huge. And so it's really important to give these young people the knowledge and skills that they need so that they don't have to kind of fall into the same box that so many of us grew up living under.
Well, and it's always baffling to me that people are shocked that young people are having these conversations and that young people are leading these movements, because historically it has always been young people at the forefront of the it's not new, and every generation does a little bit better than before because the previous generation poured a little bit more. Like, that's just how it goes. Like, and Shagun, you talked a little bit about this, about the intersectionality and all hands on deck. Can you say a little bit more about what that looks like to you, and how you imagine it to be in the future?
Well, this actually is a moment where I would say, please see above, because I really appreciate Queen Cheyenne and Ivana's responses to this question. When I think of intersectionality, I mean, I grew up in a household where, I talk about him a lot, but my grandfather and the role that he played in the civil rights movement, and so grew up kind of understanding, to this point that Queen Cheyenne made, about you're not, nobody's free. I'm not free until everybody's free, and so thinking about how that was understood, many years ago, that while we were pushing for Black liberation, it was understood by all of those who were allied that exact understanding that none of us are free until we ensure the liberation of Black people and African Americans in the country. So. And for me, in thinking about this, it's not only understanding how each of our experiences are interconnected, but also thinking about how some of us can be the oppressors, the oppressed oppressed, right? And so me as a Black person identifying as a male and cisgender, et cetera, understanding the role that, yes, as I'm pushing for the freedom of others and myself, that there are things that I might do, or that can be oppressive to others, and so having that understanding and ensuring that I'm keeping that in mind, anyway, so ensuring that I'm not participating in that way, and understanding that again, the freedom of those who identify otherwise is important if I'm going to be free. But I also want to say liberation, as we've all described it, also, I think it begins with self, and then moves to other avenues that a lot of us are not free ourselves while we're pushing for the liberation of our communities or our people or the world. And so, I think we might wind up talking about that later, but so when I think about this, it's also how we are, so some of us are still shackled in our own minds and actions.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on that because I think that's such a strong point, Sagun. I feel like I think about that a lot, about how there's this quote about having to kill the cop in your head, and really thinking about how we are really conditioned. Oh, Shagun, I'm sorry. But I really wanted to just uplift that, because I feel like that is so much of the internal work that we have to do. Really thinking about how are we actually not reproducing a lot of the systems that we're trying to dismantle. So, and even in like our interpersonal relationships and just the ways that we, you know, are so able to cut people off and cancel people and isolate people in our communities, how are we actually working to say, no, I believe you can change because the state doesn't believe you can change? And how do we actually embed that into our communities? That again, the change of this person is actually directly linked to the change of me, and to the well-being of myself. And so I just am ranting at that point, but I just feel like that's such a strong point, and something that I feel is so important to really ground in all of these conversations about the idea that this is also deeply internal work. And in the same thing that Ivana said, it's also very collective work. And I feel like that's like the balance that's always being held as you're kind of working in any type of work where you're kind of dreaming, imagining, or working towards liberation.
Many things can be true at the same time, and that's important for us to remember. And to your point about, you know, cutting people off, canceling them, quieting the officer in your head, and the respectability politics. It's like we say we don't want this, but these are things that are so indoctrined into our psyche that sometimes we don't realize that we're emulating it and that we're doing it. And there's this misconception that Black liberation and equity and freedom means we want what white people got. I don't want what white people got. White people not free. That's like a lie that people tell themselves. No person can be free whose power and reign rest on the pain of others. It's just inaccurate. And I just, it blows my mind that it takes so much for us to kind of look at self. You know, I try to tell people when they ask me questions about things like this, some of this starts with not just in yourself, but getting over yourself and the lies you've been told about yourself and about other people that you believe, and understanding that, you know, I can't be free if you're not free. And when we look at what's happening in the API community and all these other communities, like these are intersectional fights. And it's like, we have to be able to see the humanity in each other. And we also have to be able to understand that it's messy and complicated. Like I can be fighting for your freedom and also be recognizing that you're hurting my community too, or like I'm hurting your, like there's all of these things that have to be detangled, that we have to be willing to be uncomfortable and messy with, because it's not going to be clean. It's not going to be clean and easy and tidy. It just doesn't work that way. Ivana, what are you seeing with the girls in them at Love Your Magic? Like what are some of the things that they're thinking about this moment that we're living in?
Yeah, the moment that we're living in has definitely been really hard for our young girls' mental health in particular. I think at this time last year, so when we were seeing the protests around the killings of Black people, such as George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I think there were lots of conversations around how can you show up and advocate for yourself? Like, what does activism look like for themselves? Those were some of the conversations that we were having, but then we were also having conversations around respectability politics. And I think that we really engaged in conversations around really unlearning some of the things that society has really taught us. And I think that that is so important, but not only unlearning, but also taking accountability for some of the harm that like we ourselves have created, and as the first step. And so the young people really were just reflecting a lot on how they show up in the world and the ways in which they have had to shrink themselves, and kind of like talked about some of the pain that that has caused and how that has impacted their identity. And I think acknowledging that and taking that accountability is the first step. And then taking it a step further is like really doing the work to unlearn that so that you can show up with agency and as your authentic selves. And so that's really a lot of the work that we have been doing this past year with young people. The programming that we do really takes into account our missions and our goals, but really meets young people where they're at, and they have an opportunity to really co-create the spaces with us. And so we've had lots of conversations around respectability politics. We've had lots of conversations around activism, but also lots of conversations around mental health, because this is really impacting our young people and how they show up in the world and how they navigate the world. And so that's really what we have seen as like the three main things that our young people are grappling with right now. And I think in order for us to really achieve Black liberation, it's really going to take us taking accountability and like really acknowledging the harm that's being caused both by the community, and I think a lot of times by ourselves, just given what we've been socialized to think, and then really just like working to not only unlearn some of that work ourselves, but also passing that knowledge on to the community.
Thank you. You know, part of this conversation is inspired by Juneteenth. And, you know, the videos we opened with were inspired by Juneteenth. And we saw very quickly how everyone's idea of Black liberation is similar, but also different. And, you know, how we see things are different, even as they overlap. But as I think about Juneteenth, it's impossible not to think about, you know, how it's been made a federal holiday and how all these companies are like, oh no, you can have it off now. It's your holiday. It's like, I don't mean to be dismissive or crass, but it reminds me of last summer when all these anti-racist book clubs were popping up. And it was like, oh yes, we won racism. We fixed it. Like, you can have the day off. You can read this book. It's all going to be fine. And it's frustrating because it's like you could pass this unanimously, but we can't agree that you know, qualified immunity is bad. We can't agree on an anti-lynching bill. Like in 2021, we can't get that passed. So I would love to hear your thoughts on what it means to watch Juneteenth become a federal holiday, while other, you know, as our Congresswoman, the People's Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley says policy is a love language, and I'm not sure what love language they really be talking to us. So, Shagun, do you want to take this?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, it might get me in trouble, but and can I just say one thing too? I didn't want to pass by the point, because you made the point about I don't want to be white, I want to be free. And I think a lot about this interview that James Baldwin gave toward the end of his life, where that's actually pretty much what he said. He said, he said, we need a white history week so that white people learn their history. Because a lot of what's happening in the country is that white people don't know their history. And said, I don't want to be free, I want to grow up. And you know, he says, I've drunk my share of dry martinis, and there is some irreducible difficulty about me being white. Something is amiss. But anyway, for this particular point, you know, I bring this quote everywhere I go, but my grandfather told me not to confuse motion with progress. And we do, America, Massachusetts, Boston, we do not miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. All the, you know, the history of Black people in this country is symbolism. That's every time we bring up how we can become free, and you know, because we know the way, we are met with symbolic gestures, and that, I mean, clearly it doesn't satisfy our community, but white people and other folks should not be satisfied by that either, because again, you know, I believe Black people are the canary in the coal mine. Whatever happens to us winds up happening to everybody. Just how the state oppresses and has been oppressing Black people with over-militarization, the rest of the nation saw how that could also be turned on them. And so when it comes to you know, this particular question and how we're recognizing Juneteenth, and that's, you know, everyone is circling around that. You know, that is the history of the nation, that, you know, we want to feel good. And I'm using the we as the nation, not me in particular, but you know, we want to feel good. We want to feel as if, you know, like we do at the end of our Disney movies, that everything was happily ever after, and that this will make them happy. But you know, that is the work of a lot of people in this country, to mollify our people, that as soon as we take to the streets, let's, you know, do this, you know, whatever will seemingly make them happy, and they'll stop. But I think if the protest showed us anything, it's that people are hungry and yearning for real and actual change. And so to this point, Black Lives Matter is not a slogan. It is an understanding. It's a declarative statement that this is a belief and it should be practiced rather than pontificated about. So at some point, we hope that our electeds and other folks in leadership in the private sector and other places will understand that people cannot eat words. People need action. And that, again, when we address the harms and the issues plaguing our communities, literally every single other community benefits. Throughout our history, particularly since the 60s, we see that anytime we enact policies that Black people are pushing for, everyone else winds up benefiting. We think of affirmative action as an example, something that was talked about and pushed for in order to address issues in the Black community of not having access to different institutions. And today, who benefits the most are white women and Asian Americans. It's not a bad thing. People need access. There are different ways that different communities are barred. But at the end of the day, when we focus on policies that address issues in the Black community, everyone else benefits. I don't know any instance where it's worked in the reverse. So we'll take the holiday because we need rest. That's radical self-care, right? I know you say that a lot, Janae. So we'll take the holiday, but it's this and the holiday is not a trade-off. So if it means I'm not going to get the policies that 100,000 people in Boston took to the streets for during July and August last year, keep the holiday and give me the policies.
Thanks. And I do say we need the rest. You're right. We will take the holiday, but we also want the policies. We want the shift. We want the change. We want to move forward. Ivana, Queen Cheyenne, do you have anything you'd like to add to this before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I really want to just, again, uplift the quote about motion not even equaling progress all the time. I feel like that reminds me of a quote that I feel like I think about a lot. And again, I'm bringing quotes, and I apologize for not knowing exactly who's saying them. But the quote is basically along the lines of visibility does not equal protection. We live in a very violent country that has very violent upbringings and uses that violence and has always used that violence in ways to continue its comfortability in the systems and in the power that it has. And so I think that, I really have to uplift so much of what you just said. I feel like it's important to have rest. It's important to have those moments where we are celebrating, when we're taking stock of our history as well. As someone who is African American and descendant of enslaved folks here, that is something that I think is extremely important. Understanding more about that history, learning for folks actually about what Juneteenth is about versus the 4th of July, and really, again, where that dissonance in that history comes from is extremely important. And it is very easy, again, for the state, for, again, this kind of white supremacist system to churn out these very liberal notions of what they see as the past, right? Like, again, we saw Judas and the Black Messiah that was talking about Fred Hampton, while the Hampton House and Fred Hampton's son were literally still fundraising for money to just keep themselves up straight to support their community. And so again, we see this like liberalized neoliberalism that we live in that doesn't actually equate to material conditions changing for our communities. And I think that we have to really critique that, because it will continue, and they will continue to do it as long as they can until we say, and until, again, we continue to do that work of going out on the streets and organizing and really, imagining for ourselves what that means. So we can say even clear demands of, we don't want another movie about another leader who was murdered, or the infiltration of an organization that did so much good for our community. We want the communities that we have now to be funded, to be supported, to be given that access. And I think that is really important. And I think, everything that has been said so far is, I think, again, the see above But I think it's really important to understand that importance of the state really kind of holding that it's going to take a lot more than a holiday or a simple gesture notion, or politicians bowing and dashikis or and whatever, to be able to really give the material conditions and changes that our communities have been without for decades and generations.
Can I just add to that that I know I'm talking too much now, but there was something that Queen Cheyenne said about people taking the opportunity to learn about what Juneteenth actually is and what it means, and I appreciate that comparison to July 4th, by the way. But the making Juneteenth a federal holiday, and even to some extent the state, although I know it was our Black elected officials that pushed for it, and I appreciate they're doing so. But this is another example of the commercialization of Black pain. I mean, so how Juneteenth is, I think about MLK, and we won't go into all that, but just how we treat that holiday, how we treat Black History Month. So for the folks on the Zoom, I guess learning more and understanding Juneteenth, yes, and then also when you're back in your offices or running your company, or as the administrator of whatever, it's also thinking about where were we then, where are we now, and what you can do to ensure that as these Juneteenth holidays are coming up, we are not talking about the same things over and over again. There is I'm a bundle of proverbs, so no need to apologize, Queen Cheyenne. There's actually a great quote where someone says it'd be great if nobody cared who got the credit, and then no one knows who said the quote. But the proverb I think of is, to talk much and arrive nowhere is the same as climbing a tree to catch a fish. And we do a lot of that in Massachusetts and Boston. And so again, as we are celebrating, especially in Black communities, what Juneteenth means to us today, for our friends and allies and other communities, we should be thinking about how to ensure that when we're doing this conversation again and talking about what Juneteenth means, that we're not also peddling the same statistics that happen to be true because we haven't done anything in between those bookmarks.
Thank you so much. Ivana, did you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I think for me, learning that Juneteenth will now be acknowledged as a national holiday is really interesting, considering some of the conversations around critical race theory in schools. I think also back to my experience growing up and the fact that I didn't learn about Juneteenth in school. And so while, acknowledging that it as a national holiday, is great. I hope that with it comes some action and we can actually reevaluate our curriculum and start to have these conversations in schools, or take a step back and really think about the fact that, okay, now it's a national holiday, but we are working to ban critical race theory in schools. So what does that mean for us as a nation? And what does that mean for our young people?
And not just what it means for us as a nation and what it means for our young people, but how deeply it reflects ignorance. Like, critical race theory is taught in law school. Like, there's no elementary school, middle school out here that could say that they've been teaching it as what it actually is. They have pretty much redefined it as anything that teaches you Black history and teaches you about oppression and racism. And if you dare say that the system is broken in any way, then you are just evil, bad, and out to hurt everyone. When the truth is, the erasure of our history, the erasure of Abi history, of Native history, of pretty much anyone other than white people, is why we consistently remain in this fight over and over and over again. And it just keeps popping up over and over and over again. It's because no one wants to talk about the truth, and no one wants to feel guilty, and no one wants to feel bad. Like the story we had that just ran about Juneteenth, the videos we opened with, people were so angry about that. Like the level of anger lodged at Black people just talking about freedom and not yet experiencing the fullness of freedom was insane. Sorry, I didn't mean to rant. I have 2 questions I want to wrap with, but before that, I do want to, Sally Miller has a question for you specifically, Ivana, about mental health and the young people and what you've noticed. And sorry, I'm like reading the question in its fullness. In conversations about mental health with the young people you see, do you ever get startled about how different they are from the conversations of our own youth? I think that she's asking about our past and their present.
Mhm. I mean, I think that there are definitely we mirror each other. Like our experiences oftentimes mirror each other. Perhaps we're not, walking the same path and experiencing the same exact things. But I also think that now we have a name to what we were experiencing years ago. So when I think about the criminalization and adultification of Black girls in schools and Black and brown girls in schools, now it has a name, but that issue was still alive and well when I was in school. And so I think that for me, I've never really been startled when it comes to their experiences and their struggles with mental health, because growing up, those were some of the same issues that I faced. I just didn't have the knowledge about what those issues were, and I didn't have the language to speak about them. And actually, the work that I do it because I want to be for young people what I wish I had growing up. And so I think being able to provide these safe spaces where young people can show up as their authentic selves and have these conversations, and we can talk about, okay, so criminalization, that's what's happening when I'm told that I'm being sassy, or when I'm sent out of school, or when I'm told that, my shorts are too short for school, or my skirt is a little too short. That's adultification. And like, they didn't have the language for that before. And I know that growing up, I didn't have that language. And so for me, I've never been startled. And for me, it's really just been about raising awareness and really teaching young people that, hey, like, what you're naming, this is what the issue actually is, and how can we work together to kind of disrupt it.
And when you describe those instances, I think about what Queen Cheyenne said about how this is a violent country. And I say that a lot in my work. And I want to stress to people that when we say this is a violent country, we don't just mean physical violence. Like, it is violent to grow up as a Black girl, as a Black them, and literally be policed out the gate. It starts for us at 5. I believe it starts for Black boys at 8 or 10. The study shows, but it's just like to out the gate be adultified and criminalized, and to be in spaces where it grows with you. It starts in school and it grows with you in corporate spaces. You can be in a debate with someone and they will say, "Why are you yelling?" or "You're so angry." And these are the ways in which it shows up, shrinks you, and causes you to start code switching and literally navigating the world in a way that does not allow you to be your full self and fully free. But as we wrap this discussion, I want to talk about joy and the beauty of us. It's very easy to talk about these things and talk about the suffering and the oppression and the supremacy, but that's not who we are. That is not how we define Blackness. And part of the reason why Juneteenth is filled with Black people and Black families having cookouts and parties and dances is because we are beauty and joy. And I have 2 final questions, and that is, what gives you joy, and what's working in Black Boston? Because the outside world will tell us Boston is the worst place for Black people. There's no they try to erase us. There's no Black people in Boston. They will say all these things, but unless you live here and love here, you actually don't know just how Black and beautiful it can be. So I want to close on the note of us talking about what's working in Black Boston and what gives you joy. Queen Cheyenne.
I think what gives me joy is a lot of the collectivity. I think it's so beautiful, really, like we said, to see. Like I grew up in Cambridge, but all my family is from Boston. On my dad's side, my dad grew up in Columbia Point, and so did my grandmother and my grandfather. And for me, not only just having a big family, like everybody in Boston is somehow my cousin in some way, but also that there really is this openness. There is, this, I think this this really beautiful bridge that we're seeing of community care, especially in the past year. I feel like I've seen it, even in even more abundance. But I think even in the ways that I was talking about growing up in public housing in Cambridge, of the ways that we took care of each other, the ways that we supported each other, we made sure that each other's kids got to school on time, that each other's families were making sure that we were eating, that we were supporting one another through, bills and payroll and tax season. There was a collective care that was always being grounded in my communities that I grew up in with my family in Boston and my communities in Cambridge. And I think that that's something that gives me so much joy about continuing to grow and continuing to build here in Cambridge and in Boston, is that this is collective work. Like this is, I don't see anything that I do as queens, whatever, or queens this or queens that. This is really collective work that we have built, and that, we're continuing to build across, whether it's FTP or it's, the Black Response or Cambridge Heart. We're all really grounding that our communities have to be at the forefront of this work. And I feel like that's something that's been so beautiful to really see so many different communities really centering, is that it's us, it's not me, it's not I, that it's us, and that we need to take care of each other. So I think specifically in my communities and in Black Cambridge and in Black Boston, that's what I've seen so much and has given me so much joy and so much hope, and towards, how this movement can really continue and grow from when I'm not even a young person no more. So I really love that.
Havana.
Yes, so I would say that what brings me joy and what's working in Boston for me are the same. And I would say is community, which is much of what Queen was just speaking of. I think in Boston, we have all had experiences that perhaps haven't been felt the most welcoming for us as Black people. And so it's been really nice to see in the past few years how we have come together as a collective to create those spaces. And so I'm thinking about organizations like my own, Love Your Magic, that really supports Black and Brown girls and creates those safe spaces. And then I'm thinking about organizations like Boston While Black and organizations like the Teachers Lounge, who are really just creating community for us to really come together and not only celebrate each other, but also support each other and have meaningful conversations about our experiences and how we can shape those while living in this city.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Queen Cheyenne, if you're not young, then God help me. I am ancient. So no. So when I think of, and I do want to say, I saw there was a question from Katrina about reparations, and yes, I'll just say yes. And there are conversations about reparations, and I will invite you to them. What brings me joy? Wes, of course, my little puppy. But the work that I'm doing brings me joy. Supporting and uplifting the community that has allowed me to be who I am and has supported me through everything brings me joy every single day. I think it's why I work so much and so hard. And then being around, just being around Black people brings me joy. To be able to share those experiences and reflections and to just be and not have to pretend or put on a show. When I think of what's working in Boston, first of all, the fact that we're still here is what's working. And for those who don't know, Black people make up a quarter of the city's population. For those who think that there are no Black people here, and they didn't find out until our mayor, Kim Cheney, was elevated to that position. But I think of the communities that we've built. We hear that word over and over again, but it's a true reality in Boston that all the communities that we have not only built, but then also brought together. The beauty of Boston is in the diversity of the diaspora here in Boston. It's not just African Americans, it's also Haitian Americans, other Caribbean Americans, Africans, and so many Afro-Latinas and Afro-Latinos, and all of us are interconnected and work together and love together. I think that's what's working in Boston. And I'll end with, there's a proverb that says that if you want 1 year of prosperity, grow grain. If you want 10 years of prosperity, grow trees. But if you want 100 years of prosperity, grow people. And what's working in Boston is that Black people are working together to grow people, to ensure that our our communities grow and thrive for generations to come.
That part. Thank you all so much. I know that we had tons of questions that we couldn't get to, including reparations, and visible outcomes, but I do think that we talked a lot about things that can be done to lead to visible outcomes. I want to close with an amazing quote by Ossie Davis that I think is so beautiful for all Black people across the world, but especially here in Boston, where we do make up a quarter of the population and we are reflective of the depth and multitudes of our gorgeous diaspora. And that's, I find in being Black a thing of beauty. Joy, a secret cup of gladness. And I love my Blackness and yours, you guys. Have a great day. Thank you for being here. Happy Juneteenth. Learn the history.